Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Megan, and welcome for joining us today. We are excited to be back with another Red Dot Café. I'm Megan Pope, a TEDx San Antonio speaker, curator, and a communication lecturer at Texas A&M University San Antonio, and I will be your host for today. We hope this live stream series adds value and inspiration to your daily life. Today, we're going to talk about the impact of COVID-19 on college and university campuses and the issues that they are facing, how they're handling it, and discussions for how to tackle some of these issues. We have four amazing people here today to have this conversation with us. So let me go ahead and introduce them. First, we have Jordan Fischette, coming to us from Las Vegas. He currently serves as the Director of Strategic Engagement and Education for the Alpha Tau Omega fraternity and is CEO of Real Talk Agency, where he goes around the country and speaks out on the need to eliminate toxic masculinity and hazing from higher education student organizations. Next, we have Dr. Jean Latting, the president of Leading Consciously LLC and Professor Emerita at the Graduate College of Social Work from the University of Houston. As a consultant, researcher, and educator, Jean focuses on leadership in multicultural and diverse organizations. Next, we have Dr. Tim Mottet, who resides in Colorado and is the president of Colorado State University, Pueblo. Before becoming president of CSU Pueblo, Tim had a 17-year career in higher education in both Texas and Missouri. Finally, rounding out our conversation tonight, we have Dr. Barry Regan, who will be chatting from us in his home in Arizona. Barry is currently the professor of communication at Central Arizona College, where he serves as the advisor of the Debate and Speech Club. Together, they join us to reflect on COVID-19 in higher education. Please join me in welcoming Jean, Jordan, Tim, and Barry. Thank you, everyone, so much for being here. Today, we want everyone to take part in the conversation. So if you're at home, please feel free to leave your questions and comments in the chat, whether you're coming from YouTube or Facebook. Troy Sandage is behind the scenes. He'll be monitoring the feed and will give us questions as we go through if we have time. We're happy to have y'all join us today. I know there's a lot to chat about, so let's jump in. The first question is coming your way, Tim. As the college president of Colorado State University, Pueblo, tell us about the pivot to remote learning in March 2020. I know that was a really big shift for most of us. We're normal as it goes, and then spring break hit, and most of us just went 100% online. What were some of the biggest challenges, and how did you and your institution adapt?
Well, Megan, we had about a week to prepare, and I think throughout the preparation to go online, I think it gave us a new appreciation for those universities who are devoted to online education. But we had to answer two questions. One is, how do we teach and learn in an online environment, and how do we do that across the university? And then second, how does our staff, how do we run a university on a day-to-day basis, the business of the university? How do we do that in a remote operation as well? So, in 7 days, we did the hard work, and we went to an online university at the end of those 7 days. The first big challenge was making sure that our students and our faculty and staff had access to the necessary technology. So this is primarily the computers, the tablets, and so we went through a very quick procurement process to get that technology not only on the campus, but getting it distributed to the appropriate individuals who needed that level of technology. And then because we are in Colorado, we have a number of students and faculty and staff who live in more of the mountainous regions of the state, but also in rural parts of the state where they may have technology, but they don't have connectivity. So we had to work through making sure that we solve that connectivity problem, and we did that through the purchase of numerous hotspots that allowed us to meet both of those needs. Once that was resolved, then it's developing your people. How do you use the technology to work in a remote environment? But for our faculty and staff, they designed courses that were designed for a face-to-face environment, and you just can't put that course into an online environment and expect a desirable outcome. There is a translation process. So very quickly, we pulled together a group of faculty and staff who did professional development for all of our faculty and our staff on providing best practices on how do we do this and how do we do that well. And then it's the final thing was just the essential staff. How do you make decisions about who is working on the campus, who is not working on the campus? How do you keep them safe? But we needed individuals on the campus to take care of the physical plant, but we also had the need for, we've got international students living on the campus, so we needed people to be in charge of our residential life, our food service, keeping the mail going, keeping the payroll going. There was just a number of critical services that needed to occur on the campus. I'm very proud of my team, and we've been doing this now for a year. We've learned a lot, and I hope we never have to do this again. But if we do, I think we've learned a lot about the next pandemic, which I hope is a lifetime away.
Gosh, yeah. Talk about, a learning curve. I'm sure that was really stressful to undertake. And I know that when I was I teach public speaking classes. And so you design a public speaking class to be face-to-face. It is totally different to teach public speaking online. And so just in my little world of making my classes online, that was hard enough. I can't imagine planning an entire university going remote in the safety. So that kudos to you for all the good work you do. Barry, I'm curious more about the teacher perspective. You were teaching mostly face-to-face in March 2020 as a communication studies professor, and then, bam, you get the word that Central Arizona College is going remote. Talk about the shift a little bit from the faculty perspective, and what was that like?
Yeah, it was, just like Dr. Mottet mentioned on the administrative side for faculty, it was really difficult, especially because we not only gear our entire curriculum around engage face-to-face lectures, that in-person experience, but our students specifically seek that out. So essentially it became a question of how do you appeal to students online when they themselves want to be face-to-face? So there were really two things that faculty, I know, not just at our college, but colleges around the country did. First is that the implementation of one-on-one meetings over Zoom or some other type of video software service, that became really important, just as follow-up questions to, whatever was going on, maybe to catch up, have a little bit explanation more. Those are the important factors, I think, that really help students feel connected to the degree possible, given all the turmoil that was going on. In addition, one thing that I think became really important that I drew from my time, teaching remote classes that were fully remote before COVID-19 at Central Arizona College, at Purdue University Global, and Grand Canyon University, is the importance of recorded video lectures that mirror in many ways exactly what you do in the classroom as much as possible. So that includes showing a video to begin, having a discussion question for them to think about as they're watching, having lectures where you're still using interesting, engaging, fun examples for the concepts you're discussing. So it is important to remember that even though that shift was unbelievably difficult, was really hard to do in the middle of the semester, there are still strategies that I think were done on our end as faculty that became really impactful for the students, that we hope at least allowed them to persist through the end of the semester and kind of stay on track to graduate.
Yeah, I learned maybe like 3 new softwares. I have video editing software on my computer now. I learned this new software called Nearpod, which is a student response system where you have a lecture and then there's a code, and students log in with the code on their cell phone and they can type their answers in. And yeah, having that library of videos prepared just in case, you can't make it to class and you have to send them the lecture has been so important. So I know we've all done a lot of really hard work. However, there have been some unforeseen challenges, including much time spent alone for students who would otherwise be socializing with their peers on campus. Jordan, I really wanted to ask you, with increased isolation at such a vulnerable age, there's risk of students shifting their time to message boards and other social media outlets, which can correlate with the development of more toxic online behaviors. In your work as an education advocate, speaker, and crisis counselor, you have seen students search for belonging on campuses. How can students be proactive right now in engaging in healthy online behaviors during the pandemic?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, and like you said, college is such a significant time for so many people, and it really is an opportunity to solidify their identity, right? They go to campus, yearning to evolve and grow, and oftentimes then view themselves as adults. And that's really changing right now. It's important, in my opinion, you always want to start with facts, right? Facts are your best friend. They're the fundamentals and the foundation to move forward. And unfortunately, you think of how many students are on college campuses today, whether that's online or the few that are in person, it's actually a pretty niche industry. So there's a lot of research happening right now on the K through 12 experience and a lot on adults outside of college. So unfortunately, there's actually not a lot of research on the college experience right now, but we can extrapolate from other data and make educated assumptions on what it looks like for them. So the first thing I would say is it's okay to feel how you feel. Students absolutely are overwhelmed in many capacities. The OECD has reported that there has been increases in sexual exploitation, cyberbullying, and predatory behaviors. But there are also things that people aren't always necessarily expecting in a case like this. So in late summer last year, the CDC released a report that said young adults, racial and ethnic minorities, essential workers, and unpaid adult caregivers were having disproportionately high effects by the pandemic and were turning to substance abuse and high levels of suicidal ideation. That's something that really makes sense when you hear it, but specifically for essential workers and what that looks like on college campuses. We're seeing med students, nursing students, or just anybody who's looking to go in the medical field being subjected to levels of cyberbullying that we've never really seen before, right? When you think of someone going into nursing school, you don't anticipate that they're going to get harassed online because they're supporting science. So people are stressed, people are bored, and they're never being supervised, right? Your parents might be working from home too, or colleagues, but you don't necessarily have that college roommate or professor or in-person interactions. So I think the really big thing you can do to be proactive is to consciously think about what you're saying and what you're doing when you're online, and knowing that your words and your actions have ramifications. Just like they do in person, they do online, especially when you look at millennials, but specifically Gen Z in campuses right now. The virtual space and their real life, the lines really have become blurred in many ways to them. So to make sure that you understand that you are still using respect and you can absolutely engage in critical dialogue, but to do it in a respectful way.
Gosh, there's just so many things to be concerned about right now. Jean, as a follow-up to Jordan, how can educators be proactive to teach healthy online behaviors during the pandemic? Looks like you're muted there, Jean. I know as your time as a social worker, you taught classes about this. I'm so curious to know what you would have to say.
Okay. I appreciate what Jordan had to say about cyberbullying and how challenging it is for people who may have grown up in a trusting environment or may decide to trust someone online. So first rules is to be safe, to avoid predators. A friend of mine hooked up with a guy online and found out he was a fraud. Now, I'm using hooked up in my words. I know it means something different in a different generation. So I mean, she connected with him, fell in love with him, and he turned out to be a fraud. So safety first and avoiding predators. Then there's the anti-bullying, standing up if that you see that happening. Jordan mentioned that cyberbullying is very intense now. A friend of mine was on an online discussion group and someone started harassing her, and the other 25 people on that group, no one said anything. No one stood up for her. And so literally she left that in tears. So if you can, if you have the strength, don't just observe someone being bullying, being thankful it's not you. Stand up. There's power in numbers. So that's the second thing I would recommend. The third is being careful what you post. It will last. It will last your lifetime and beyond. a guy applied for an internship with me when I was on the faculty. And I looked him out. He got honors, head of this, head of that. I looked him up on Facebook, and there he was with some kind of liquor bottle and shirtless and tattooed up. So he did not get the job I was offering. And he never had a way to know that the reason he did not get that job was because of what was posted on Facebook. So be careful of that. Now, in terms of what the teachers should do, the educators distinguish between awareness and action. And adoption, by action, I mean adoption of the change. Awareness is what you do, is what you're hoping for when you lecture. What I just did was try to promote awareness. I said, don't do this, all of that. That's awareness. But there's a whole chasm between I know what to do and I'm willing and able to do it. What we know that bridges that gap is reflection. If the student has a chance to think about it, and so you hear it, then you reflect on it, think about it, discussion group, decide if this is something I want to do for myself, and then I might be prepared to adopt it, the new behavior. So I think.
Yeah, that sounds a lot like, bystander effect. It reminds me of how, right, if there's a behavior rule and we see that everyone in that group is obeying that rule, we don't want to be the one person who jumps in. And so your friend, unfortunately, was the victim of this. No one wanted to help her. And I can see this happening all the time when you're walking down the street and you see like a homeless person and you're like, okay, well, that's not my job. I don't have to help them. Everyone else is ignoring them. But unfortunately, it seems like this is now being pulled online, and we are not standing up for people. And that's just awful. Barry, did you have any thoughts on this and how we can help out?
Yeah, it's one of the most difficult parts about online communication, right, is that there's this important communication concept called face and face work.
Yes.
And the face and face work online is much different than it is face to face, right? First is that nonverbal communication becomes such an important part of developing relationships face to face. And the lack of the ability to do that online means that we're missing out on what scholars would say is between like 65 and 90% of the communication process, which is nonverbal. So when we only have verbal messages to go off like we do on social media, then it becomes really difficult, right, to find the nuance in messages to understand kind of the mindset that someone is on. The second part of it in terms of face work is the digital identity, researchers are finding, is now being created in many ways separate from the face-to-face identity. So there is a real difficulty now, especially for young people, whether it be high school students or younger, or even college students, to manage how do I find that balance between posting maybe good things that are happy in my life, that are maybe authentically important to who I am, but at the same time demonstrating the nuance of my humanity. That is, how do I frame things that are more negative? Am I posting something so that way people will respond kind of sympathetically, or am I doing so as a way to kind of demonstrate my holistic being? And so one of the most difficult parts, I think, is how do students negotiate that identity? And there's a couple ways I think it can be done. One of the first and I think important parts is there's this concept, social penetration theory. And essentially what it says is the more that we have mutual self-disclosure, the more we feel comfortable with another person, the more we feel comfortable kind of being who we are in an authentic way. And so one thing that I've been telling my students, just knowing what the research says on this, is to be careful in revealing too much too soon. And if you are going to reveal something about yourself, make sure it's something you wouldn't mind framing in the same way face to face, maybe even framing it to your friends versus your family, because no longer can you use, right, any other types of nonverbals or other messages to augment that post, right? Now it's interpreted the same by everyone because of that verbal communication.
It's almost like when you're on an airplane and you like just open up and tell your whole life story to the person next to you. I think the online creates a false sense of intimacy when you may not know this person at all, and yet you're telling your life story. and you don't know them and their intentions. Jordan, do you want to tell us some thoughts on this?
Yeah, I also think we're seeing a really large increase in instances of pluralistic ignorance, which in the simplest of terms is everyone thinks that what's happening is inappropriate or they should step up and speak, but no one else has, so they incorrectly assume that they are the person thinking differently than everyone else. And it's kind of the idea of no one believes it, but everyone thinks everyone believes it. And online, we lose so much body language and so much communication that you would see in the classroom or on campus where they're not able to convey that. So I think we're going to continue to see a decrease in upstander behavior for sure.
Thank you for that great conversation on that. I know that mental health and connection right now are so important. And it's important that we take care of ourselves and the students in our lives. However, there is another population on campus that I don't really think get as much discussion or time in the press. It's not just students who need advocacy and support, it's staff. Jean, I know that you have some expertise in this area, so I wanted to ask you, during your work as a leadership consultant, you have worked within higher education and seen inequities at work in the organizational hierarchy. During the pandemic, do you think there have been inequities for staff on campus? Tell us how you helped a staff council recently and tangible ways that higher ed administrators can solve these inequities.
Definitely, there have been inequities. And to explain this, people know about hierarchies in hospitals. We know that doctors and administrators run the kingdom. And the lab technicians, for an example, are on the lower on the totem pole. What a lot of people don't understand, that in universities, the same thing holds true, with the faculty and the administrators running the program, running the college campus. They're the ones that everyone looks at as in charge, and they're the ones who get all of the accolades. Meanwhile, the staff who are responsible for student experience get either ignored or downplayed. This just intensified during COVID because the lower level staff who were classified as essential were then required to come in and to continue their operations in a way that faculty and some administrators didn't have to because they could stay at home. So in my work with my university, the University of Houston Graduate College of Social Work, the dean there, whom I cannot speak highly enough of, Dean Alan Detlef, called me in to do work with the staff. What prompted it was that there was a survey that the university did to find out how faculty, staff, and administrators were feeling. And across the university, as far as I understand it, the staff scored the lowest in terms of job satisfaction. And that was especially so in my college, the Graduate College of Social Work. I should clarify that I'm a professor emerita there, so I'm still considered a faculty member, but I'm not on the payroll. So he asked me to do consulting with the college on what to do to raise the satisfaction of staff. In talking to him and then interviewing other the staff, I realized that a great part of the problem was that the staff don't get recognized. They don't get the same kind of recognition that faculty administrators do. A faculty publishes a paper, an email goes out, it gets written up in the college newspaper. A staff member meets a goal, hosts a great event, meets their recruitment goals, zip, nothing happens. And so the staff started feeling more and more invisible. So I started my work with them before COVID hit, and then COVID hit. And some staff absolutely went into despair. But by that time, we were working on them forming a staff council so that they too would have a voice. So they too would have someone to come to, individual staff members would have someone to come to talk with about what problems they had. And the staff council got up and running. They had a internal communications committee. They had a recognition committee. Let's see. They had the executive committee, of course. And so each of these committees that were formed to address issues that the staff had. And together, the committees came together to form the executive council. My part in it was to meet with them, cheer them on. I did workshops with them, for example, how to run a meeting. Many of the staff members had no experience in heading up a group where people are meeting, making decisions. So I did things like that. The bottom line, they're still meeting. And when I last checked with them, the ones who had felt that they had not been recognized told me that yes, they did. The dean, the staff council was an important part of that, but the dean himself played an essential part of that. Once he got that the staff members were feeling left out, he then went out of his way to issue thank you notes, to send commendations to all faculty about what different staff had done. There was one big important event that was pulled off with the involvement of 5 staff members. Before we began this work, no recognition would have been given. This event would have happened and everybody would have moved on to the next thing. Instead, this time he wrote an email, a 1-page email, where he listed everybody's name. And you can just imagine how that felt to someone who does some small task in a major event, to see their name recognized by the dean of the college. So what is happening now, as I said, is they're being, they have their staff council, they're still meeting, and they were also, I forgot that I want to add this one thing. The staff council, the executive committee, decided when COVID hit that they were going to reach out to the essential workers who had to come in to make sure that they were okay, to see what could be done.
Wow, it sounds like you did some really good work there. I was really touched when we were preparing for this event today. You told a story about how there was a custodial staff, I think it was a woman, who had become, and I don't know if this was during COVID or pre-COVID, I'm going to assume it was pre-COVID, but just to give an example of how important the staff on campuses are, this custodial staff became like a mother to these students. They would go in to like cry and like have a talk, someone to talk to and to release with. And I'm just so touched by that. And I remember when I was in college, there was definitely staff on campus that was a resource to me. So I'm just so glad of this work that you're doing. I really appreciate staff on my campus, and I'm glad you're doing this work advocating for them. It's so important. It would seem the pandemic is creating not only inequities for many students and staff in higher ed, but also missed opportunity. This leads me to another point. Barry, this question is for you. As the fall 2020 semester began, and now as we are into spring, the loss of study abroad opportunities and in-class interactions due to college courses going mostly remote meant that students have lost out on traditional forums for breaking down cultural biases and ethnocentrism. What did you do and are doing, and what can instructors do to provide fruitful opportunities online for cultural interactions that accomplish some of these same goals?
Yeah, it's one of those sad elements, I think, that one of the most, I think, enlightening experiences anyone can go through is to have to challenge yourself by living with people from a different culture who you have to adjust to, as opposed to others coming here, say, to the United States and adjusting to you. And what's difficult is, study abroad's cultural organizations, kind of cultural events on campus really are the foundation of it, and why they're so widely done is kind of based off this concept known as all ports contact hypothesis. And essentially what the hypothesis says is the more we have positive interactions with people from cultures that are different than ours, our biases and stereotypes about people from those cultures tend to decrease. And that's obviously an important factor, right, in an ever-increasing diversity world that we see today. But here's the good news. There is actually a strategy to use that professors can do and that schools can implement that doesn't require anyone to travel anywhere. And in fact, it really just is all about understanding and diving deep into the self. And what I'm referring to is there's this interesting study that came out in 2010 by the Journal of Social Psychology. And it said that folks who identify as European American versus those who identify as white actually have significantly decreased prejudicial beliefs and behaviors. And one of the really cool parts to this research is showing that just by learning more about your own culture, especially if you are from a dominant group like in the United States, from a variety of European American backgrounds, that actually, if you start to understand, research your own culture, have an understanding of what those beliefs are, it gives you a better way to fit in and to make connections with those around you. And so learning about this culture and learning about your own culture, especially if you're from a dominant group, has such a really important factor. The first and other kind of example to this on a personal level is, I teach at a college that's primarily majority minority with a lot of Native American students. And what's interesting is I had a hard time really relating to those students at first because I'd never taught Native American students, and I noticed their communication patterns were different. So what I did was I went down to my own roots as Scottish American, and I thought of John Muir, who's the foundation for a lot of the national parks in California. And I really thought about the intrinsic connection between what John Muir meant to the preservation of land in the West and the role of the environment and nature in Native American cultures. And that became an important foundation where I would strike up conversations with students, have a kind of a discussion of their spiritual beliefs as it pertains to the environment and their religion, as well as mine. And so one thing that I hope that universities and colleges do across the country is to have a productive evaluation and a productive understanding of race and understanding of culture, to have students research their own. And a good example of this too is I actually have a lot of students ask who are German American, I never knew what my culture was or why. And a lot of that has to do with specifically people who are German American post World War II and during World War II were afraid to reveal their roots of culture in Germany. So they would assimilate as much as possible to the generic American norm. And so one thing that's important to know is it maybe understands why people react or go in that way. So hopefully more colleges, universities can encourage self-reflection of cultural identity to help them be more prepared students for the future.
Thank you so much, Jordan. Do you have any thoughts to add on this topic?
Yeah, I think we also see people have this like crushing feeling that they need to try to replicate a lost study abroad experience, or that they need to consume massive amounts of information in very small periods of time, and it stresses them out and it's overwhelming. I think you can also, without diminishing the fact that these are difficult times for students, I think you can also see some silver linings and some positive outcomes or positive solutions for students. So one example is your campus probably hosts something like a cultural fest or a global fest that they've moved online that you can attend. Well, you can most likely attend that at other universities now too, because they are opening their programs to either a local community or the national or global community. But I also think sometimes going outside the classroom can be an incredible experience as well. So food, film, art, music, they are all elements that really act as an expression of cultural identity. So there are things that you can do to educate yourself that can still be entertaining and don't necessarily have to stress you out as much. Two really good examples I can give you are virtually all of the Smithsonian institutes and museums have moved collections online so you can expose yourself and change your worldview and see things in a different way. Or even things like the William F. Harrah College of Hospitality at UNLV offers free virtual programs with both food for culture and cuisine and also sommeliers for wine. So it's an opportunity where you can learn about another culture, but you can also have a good time and enjoy the experience. I think that sometimes the first step in really altering your worldview is re-examining your own critical lens in your smaller world.
Ooh, those are great words. I can see how students may not have had as many opportunities right now to really decenter and learn from and about others during the pandemic, as we are mainly off campus and online. I know faculty are doing their best to recreate these opportunities for cultural interactions to deconstruct ethnocentrism remotely. But as we are mostly still remote, it has raised a slew of questions and concerns. So Tim, I wanted to ask you, moving classes remote and shifting online has created access and equity concerns. Tell us what these concerns are and how they are created and what your administration has done to address them.
It's a great question, Megan, and I think that the pandemic has really amplified, or it's made visible, the inequities with the student population. And the way that I like to think of this is going to college is learning how to, there's a process of learning how to navigate going to college. There's a process to learning how to navigate going to college and managing your work. A lot of our students have to work in order to afford to go to college. And then there's another process of learning how to navigate going to college, managing your work, but also managing your family and your personal life. So those are all kind of ecosystems that when blended together, it presents a number of challenges and obstacles. And every day students are problem solving. They're trying to learn, how do I navigate this situation? And what I think has been made visible to us is that different students have different sets of resources and knowledge that allows them to be more successful in navigating those challenges. So if you are a second generation college student or a third generation college student, you've got a network at home. They have gone through this before, and they're providing you with, here's how you navigate that, here's how you do this in order to reach your desired outcome. For a first gen student whose family probably does not know or have exposure to this, they cannot provide the same level of expertise or knowledge. And so universities got to step in. We've got to be able to recognize when you have those inequities and to provide that knowledge gap. The other piece of this is just resources. If you've got the resources, and I'm talking financial resources, money can allow you to help navigate a number of obstacles. If you don't have to work, that reduces many of the obstacles, allowing you to reach your educational outcomes and goals. So I think resources and knowledge are both needed. I think university administrations have got to be sensitive and paying attention to the inequities. And often students will not bring them to your attention for a variety of reasons. So it's our ability to notice them and then to work and to develop processes that levels the playing field, if you will. I'm going to give you, here's some of the things that we've done to navigate and to help our students provide more of an equitable place for them to study and learn. One is we've received CARES funding from the government. It's making sure that the CARES funding is administered swiftly, quickly, and in a manner that meets the needs of the students. So it's making sure you've got the right formulas in place. And I know at our institution, students played a role in developing those formulas that determined how those funds were to be administered to students. Number two, it's keeping, we've kept all of our students employed during the pandemic. So even though a lot of the work study positions, some of those can be done in a remote manner, some cannot. In addition to just non-student, the non-student work, or excuse me, the work study, but just students who are working on an hourly basis on a campus. We have made it an effort to keep all of our students employed. No one has been laid off as a result of the pandemic. So we're in a position where we can do that, but I think that is one of the strategies to help navigate or to mitigate the inequities. Number three is we're changing our policies during the pandemic. So there is a number of policies that are in place for a normal working environment. We are far from that. And so the policies that are currently in place do not serve all the students in the same manner. So there's been a number of policies that we've either changed as a result of the pandemic or that we've become more lenient. And in doing that, from a policy perspective, I think we've been able to mitigate some of the inequities that were once in place. And then finally, even though the university is working in a remote environment, we have really worked hard to make sure that we've got critical services from 10 to 2 every day with a touch point. There is a person, and we've set up with a testing protocol that allows us to meet the needs of students who need a high touch versus the high tech. It's a high touch, and we're available 10 to 2 to meet students' needs. So that's how I see kind of the inequities playing out on the campus, but also what my administration has done. And I think it's very similar to many other university administrations have done something. Some of the work is very similar to this.
I know that a lot of administrations have put in a lot of work at my campus, Texas A&M University San Antonio. They have worked really hard to address some of these same issues. And so thank you for your work. It sounds like your campus has a really strong game plan in place, and I really like that high touch idea. Is trying to address these concerns of access and equity while being mindful. It is no small task. And this is not the only topic administrators have been addressing currently. This last year has seen our institutions of higher education becoming sites of protest and conversation. Jean, this question is for you. While COVID-19 is raging, the tragic losses of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and other Black lives have sparked protest and increased campus civil rights organizing. Growing up in the segregated South and attending Columbia University for graduate school, in the post-civil rights era, you have seen decades of racial strife and movements towards greater equality. You in particular taught social work courses and encouraged students to see beyond their own cultural lens. There are many conversations being had about fostering social and economic equality currently. Explain what faculty, staff, campus administrators, and students can do to be anti-racist and foster multiculturalism.
Yes, glad to answer this question. I'm glad to see the protests. I'm glad to see what we're moving into now in this period of time. So first, let me address what is multiculturalism. A lot of people quote Dr. King, Martin Luther King, and say that he said, don't see color. So a lot of people still believe that color blindness is the way to go. Well, first of all, that's not what Dr. King said. What he said in his I Have a Dream speech is that he envisions a day when Black men and white men, Protestants and Catholics, Jews and Gentiles are united together. So notice he didn't say all the religions come together. He didn't say abandon your religious beliefs and adopt one religion. He didn't say abandon your racial identity and adopt one racial identity. So being able to see the differences among us and respect the differences among us is something that is human nature and something we should strive for. In the melting pot analogy, which is what color blindness is, we all go into the same pot and stir it up, and you can't distinguish the peas from the carrots from the broccoli from the meat. It's all a mush. This doesn't make sense because we see differences. So what's multiculturalism is how can we come together with our individual and group identities and still respect one another and draw on the best of what our collective talents have to bring. So on this panel, for an example, we're not all one race, one gender, one age, one profession. We're not all one anything. We all have different things to bring to the table, and that's what we're trying to do. So that's what multiculturalism. So now the question is, given in a multicultural environment, how do we then navigate racism and avoid and become anti-racist? The first thing is what Barry was talking about in terms of recognize that you do have a cultural lens. It's amazing to me how many people think they don't have a cultural lens or they have this broad America cultural lens. We all have a distinct cultural lens, and as Barry said with his Irish perspective. he has Irish ancestry. So that's one thing. The second is to educate yourself. If you have a question about any culture, you hit Google or Yahoo or whatever your first favorite search engine is, and you can get the answer. There's no reason to not know. The third is, in these diverse, conflictual environments, be prepared to mess up. If you're interacting with someone with a social identity that you don't know much about, you may say something stupid. You may embarrass yourself. You may offend the other person. Just be ready for that. None of us are perfect. All of us say things that we then turn around and wish we hadn't said. So that's going to happen. So get ready for that. The question then is, once you do that and you see that you've done that, then you go and ask people, how am I, or what should I have said? Oh, I called you Oriental and you prefer Asian descent. Fine. Now I know that. So if you mess up, find out what is the correct way. What would that person have preferred you to do? The third is ask for feedback, because not everybody is going to tell you. As a faculty member, I used to even appoint students and give them extra credit if they would monitor the classroom temperature and let me know if I've messed up, because the students will talk about faculty behind their backs, and we can go the whole semester and not know. In the workplace, you can go the whole semester and not know. I mean, the whole year and not know. So the question is, do you have somebody who can give you feedback, and can you ask for that feedback? And then the last thing is to be prepared for people to project their history on you. I grew up in the segregated South, and middle-aged white men were not safe for me. I was physically not safe around groups of them, and I was warned about that. So now I'm a grown person here and at the University of Houston and other places, and I'm running into middle-aged white men all the time. So I'm stilted. The white man might notice I'm stilted. He thinks, what's wrong with her? What's wrong with me? And none. I'm projecting my history on him. So we all have to learn how to move past our history. And if someone is projecting our history on us, we have to learn not to take it personally.
Thank you so much for sharing that. This is such an important conversation to have. I did want to go pop into the chat. We had a comment a few minutes ago from Washington, from Facebook. I think this was talking about when Barry was talking about like decentering, and that is so true. It's a great opportunity to learn about ourselves and see the similarities to other people around the world. And then we have Joseph from Facebook, who said, as a professor, it has been amazing to see the resilience of my students and their resourcefulness. That said, I have noticed that students and faculty definitely go through waves of emotions through the semester. Examples may be basic as students turning their cameras off on synchronous classes or non-synchronous classes, going silent, or needing to check in with the professor, and just talking about being really flexible. And I think that kind of ties into some comments that Barry and Tim had. Barry, I think you wanted to weigh on in this, right?
I did, yeah. And one of the important things there's two important things I think that students can do, and that we as members of an institution can encourage them to do. The first one is to go to, whether it's a party or, and hopefully either a COVID-safe party or one that's virtual, be the only person of your race or ethnicity in that group, or be one of the very few. And one of the important factors that comes with that is that, especially if you're from a dominant culture like I am, I was fortunate enough to be able to attend a church service with a friend of mine where it was 100%, well, I should say 99.9% Asian American except for me. I made a point growing up to go to a really close friend of mine, to go to his house, go hang out with his family, an extended family. And the entire time I was the only non-Indian person there, the only person not from India. And that was a huge eye-opening experience, because I had to not only decenter from my perspective, but I had to then empathize with people who were not in the dominant culture on a daily basis in the United States, and empathize with their experience and that sense of isolation that can come with that. The second is, and this one is, I think, really educational for younger students, have them go sit in a town council meeting, or have them go sit in some type of maybe state legislature virtual meeting, and it'll become clear very quickly just how important it is to, at an early age, instill that level of love for multiculturalism and respect for different cultures that Dr. Latting was talking about. A good example of this, my students I teach here in Arizona almost don't believe me when I tell them that the state of Arizona almost lost the Super Bowl because we refused to have MLK Day be recognized. And so you never know what you might see and what it might inspire you to change maybe levels of prejudice or bias that exist.
Tim, I thought you had a comment.
Yeah, I want to thank Jean for two ideas. One is, I like the idea of taking a classroom temperature. I've never heard of it described like that, but I think that's very important. And then this other notion of being able to mess up. And a question that I've been thinking about is, in today's classrooms, do we afford enough grace to our faculty and to our students to mess up, to misspeak? I read the Chronicle of Higher Ed, and often when someone misspeaks, it's captured on a video and then it's transmitted. And I often, as institutions of higher education, we've got to be able to have classrooms where it's okay to make a mistake and to learn from the mistake without it going viral. And so it's a question that I've been thinking about. And the offshoot of that is, if classrooms are not safe, I often worry about the learning loss, the number of hard questions that we're not asking as faculty of our students, or our students are not asking faculty the hard questions. And that ultimately leads to a learning loss. And I think there is a great opportunity. So I'm a big believer in messing up. And I like to say that everyone is pre-forgiven. So let's have a conversation, and we afford each other, I call it the space and the grace, to make mistakes and to learn from those mistakes. So I appreciated Jean's comment.
And Jean, just to wrap it all up, I mean, so how can we give grace, and how can we make these classrooms a forgiving place?
We have to plug away at it as faculty. Mm-hmm. Faculty can require it. I required it in my classes. This whole thing that we talked about earlier of standing up with someone. If someone is being bullied, that has to be part of it. What happens is someone gets panned on social media and nobody says anything. Or someone jumps on someone else in the classroom and no one, including the teacher, says anything, which I think is just so sad, so heartbreaking. And it's in an institution of higher education or institution of learning, that should be the one place where people are free to mess up. All of us mess up. And so having that as a standard in the classroom, I think is imperative. Right.
I know that with cancel culture, it's almost like you don't want to say the wrong thing because you don't want to make a mistake. And so sometimes you may not say the right thing at all. But thank you everyone for talking about this. It's so important. Just want to head over to the chat. We have Kiara from Facebook doing some claps. We have Brandon from YouTube saying hello and thanking us for having this conversation. And then Joseph from Facebook saying that his colleagues at Texas A&M run a difficult dialogue series every semester that highlights dealing with diversity, equity, and inclusiveness. So that sounds really amazing. So I'm grateful to have this opportunity to learn more and apply these ideas in my own classes. This last year has given us opportunities for examination. Barry, this next question is for you. This last year has seen unprecedented shifts to online learning rather quickly. In what ways have you seen this exacerbate the digital divide between urban and rural access to higher education?
Yeah, unfortunately, my school is halfway in between Phoenix and Tucson, the two biggest cities in Arizona, but it is itself a very rural campus. And unfortunately, what I've seen and what I know others who have seen who work at rural colleges and universities is those who live in a greater degree of social and geographical isolation are still struggling just as much, if not more, than they were pre-pandemic. And unfortunately, I think the reason for that is probably twofold. One is that because of the lack of medical resources that is oftentimes unavailable in hospitals in rural areas, they're not able to get, whether it's the vaccine or have consistent testing or have the ability maybe to get checkups every so often the way you would if you live in bigger urban areas with more access to medical resources. So they're not able to take advantage of maybe even going to a public library to access Wi-Fi, feeling safe or comfortable to go outside, maybe at a Starbucks to do work for their courses. So there's the lack of medical resources. And number two, because the Wi-Fi itself isn't very good oftentimes in rural areas, it means that students can't access, high levels of videos that eat up a lot of data on your computer, that being like recorded videos, or maybe if there's a movie to watch on Netflix, or even live streaming lectures. So it really is raising a lot of alarm bells in higher education right now, that the more there is this focus of going online, who's getting left behind, and to what degree are they getting left behind even further than before. Here's the good news though. I think there are states and cities and localities that are trying to do innovative things to help rectify these issues. So one, in Dr. Mottet's state of Colorado, the city of Fort Collins is trying to create publicly accessible broadband Wi-Fi. So that is Wi-Fi that is not controlled by, say, a telecom company, but instead ran by the city itself, essentially as a public service. And so that's something interesting I think more cities are going to look at, although certainly telecom companies and others may fight them on that. And then one that was pushed for here in my state of Arizona is to allow for rural community colleges to offer four-year degree programs, not just universities. And that may allow students to not feel like they have to go online forever or leave their area to go to college and get a four-year degree. So what I think will happen, or hopefully will happen, is a greater degree of pressure to be innovative, to be able to rectify those access problems that are really hurting rural students.
Tim, I think your campus is also kind of on this divide between rural and urban. Do you want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, and I'm in agreement with Barry. I think that, again, the pandemic has revealed and it's made very obvious what some of the connectivity problems are in the rural parts of the state. And I think state legislators and politicians are also paying attention to some of these needs and how that is only exacerbating the rural-urban divide. But I think that as a result of the pandemic, I think there are universities are paying more attention, as I mentioned earlier, to the technology, providing students with the technology and also the connectivity that is allowing us to reach more of our rural students than before the pandemic. So I think the silver lining in this is because of how we've been operating, I think we're reaching a different student. But I also like the idea of maybe rather than the community college offering the four-year degree, I'm a big advocate of the universities going to the people to offer the four-year degree. So rather than it's distance education, but it's where the university faculty and staff go to wherever the students are. And I think by kind of what I call a collaboration campus, where the four-year university partners with a community college to offer a 2+2 type of a degree, I think there's some new innovations and ways for us to better serve a rural population.
Thank you so much. We have a few comments in the chat. Mary and Veronica from YouTube say thank you and great conversation. We're glad you're listening. Hi. And then Joseph from Facebook says that the communication department, I think that's A&M, is hosting a diversity conference for undergrads and talking about how amazing that is. So y'all can definitely check out that website that he just posted. And Brandon from YouTube said, I personally see a lot of people standing up for others online, but unfortunately the negatives, even when they're not as abundant as the good things said, end up cutting deep and making a large impact. It's sad. It makes no sense how people bully online, but it's quite obvious they're hurting too. The cycle goes on and on. So, I mean, there's so many issues to talk about. We only have a little bit of time left. We only have a few questions left. So I wanted to talking about something in a new direction. So this is for you, Tim. Working at a campus myself that sits right on the line of urban and rural, I understand a lot of what you're saying. I sit in remote synchronous classes every week and hear stories related to the digital divide. So I'm glad we are having these conversations. This brings up other issues that students are facing from mostly being remote and communicating in digital ways. My bad. It's going to Jordan, not Tim. Sorry, Tim.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it is a growing problem. Psychological Magazine released an article late last year that said participants are absolutely showing higher levels of stress and anger. And it really stems from, in some cases, perceived and in many cases, a reality of a total loss of control. College is not meeting the expectations that they had. And for so many of these students, you think about it, they have been planning to go to college to some degree for their entire life. So they really have these solid expectations. I think one of the big things that you can do to combat that anxiety that you might have, though, is to create and maintain boundaries, right? There are things that might seem like simple minutia that really add up over time. So, for example, when you're on a college campus, you have your meals in the dining hall and you're instructed in the classes. Well, you probably don't think about it when you warm up a Hot Pocket and you're going to class while having breakfast, lunch, dinner, whatever on the computer. It might not seem like it's that big of a thing, but when you create those boundaries and you eat in one space, you learn in one space, X in a different space, it really helps to give you a sense of control because you are controlling your calendar. Other things you can do are schedule your day out. Choose your classes intentionally, whether you want synchronous or asynchronous classes. Do you want an environment where you're interacting with students in the moment, or do you prefer an on-demand method? That's something that you can control. And to limit your distractions as well. It's so easy when you're working from home or studying from home to be on Facebook and Instagram, and you're scrolling on your phone while you have something open on your desktop in front of you. So really limiting those distractions. And I spoke a little bit earlier about how we've blurred the lines so much between our social life in reality and our social life online. It's really important to remind yourself that Instagram is not real life. No one has that together, and you can't measure your success based on the persona someone else is sharing on social media. So to understand, and it's much easier said than done, that's simply not reality, and it should not be a barometer for your success. I do want to quickly give you two very specific tangible things you can do. Number one is there are other people out there who can help you. Services like Crisis Text Line. Anyone in America can text 741-741 and immediately be connected with an anonymous crisis counselor 24/7, 365. They exist solely to get you from a hot moment to a cool calm. So it's okay if you're feeling overwhelmed. Know that there are other people out there who want to help you. And then the other is a very common in therapy exercise. It's a grounding technique. If you're ever feeling overwhelmed or stressed, it's called the 5-4-3-2-1 method. And you just pause and you name 5 things you can see, 4 things you can feel, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 good thing about you. And when you can do those things, you can physically and mentally recenter yourself, take a few deep breaths, and continue on your way. So I think that it's important that while you're building your confidence and while you're in this virtual space, that you focus on self-care and that you focus on you.
That's so important. It's like creating a sense of groundedness and really being mindful. And I think that can be really hard to do when you're in a class synchronous and you just have to sometimes maybe take a minute and just focus on you. It's like we are important, whatever we're doing, these assignments or this grading or administrative work, it can wait. We are the most important part of ourselves. So Jean, do you have any follow-up to this? Maybe, oh, there she is. We got that mute again. We'll get John. I know you've got thoughts about this. I can't wait to hear them.
Yes. There are techniques for what to be done when we are stressed out, and there's plenty of reason to be stressed out. I love the grounding technique that Jordan just described, the 5-4-3-2-1. My favorite that I recommend to people who are totally stressed out is to scream it out. I've had 2 panic attacks in my life. A therapist friend told me to just go scream it out. And I did. I went into a closet and yelled and cursed out everybody and their mother and got it out of my system. The way I think of it is this crud builds up in our system and we suppress it. We have a lot of negative self-talk. We said, well, I should have known this. Oh, I should have done that. Oh, this shouldn't have happened. Oh, look at how great this other person is. We look at these people on social media and we think, oh, they have all of these amazing lives and my little sorry life doesn't measure up to everybody else's life. And so it just builds and builds and builds. And so screaming it out is one way of handling it. The other is whenever that negative self-talk starts coming in, and it comes into me, so I'm imagining it comes into everybody, we have to recognize that that's what it is. It's negative self-talk that's put into us because we have these images on this screen, on the screens of perfection. And we have to recognize that it's something that we do to ourselves. So when I start into that, I said, no, I'm not going there. And if I can't stop myself, I have other techniques. I have 100 techniques actually, but scream it out, whatever, the grounding technique. So that's 2. The other is to decide to stretch yourself. It's literally a decision. I will move up to my comfort zone and then I will move beyond my comfort zone, one step beyond my comfort zone. And what would that movement be? Well, contribute to others. There are other people who are miserable, reach out to somebody. There are people who are starving, go to a food bank. There are people who don't seem to understand the assignment. Send them an email. There are relatives who are waiting to hear from you. Send them an email or call them. Literally get out of yourself and give to someone else. And that's one way of calming yourself down. Because when you're giving to someone else, what you're telling yourself is, I have enough in me that I can actually contribute to someone. And that's a very important thing to feel.
That is such a good piece of advice. I know I get really anxious sometimes. I get in my head and all I can see is the spiral of doom and gloom. And if I can get out of that and go, say a kind word to someone, or like you said, volunteer, reach out to someone, all of a sudden I don't feel so worthless and I get to connect. And that's really what's so important. We actually had a question in the chat box, by the way. If y'all have questions for our folks here in the live stream, put those in the chat box. We'll try to get to them. We have one from Washington, and that was on Facebook. Washington says, how do we find the balance between accommodating students and providing structure, discipline, and respect? We'll give this to Barry first.
Yeah, great question. And one that I still am thinking about all the time with my students in my courses. I think it starts with having ample and in many times a ton of resources on the front end of assignments or big parts of a course, and then being available for one-on-one meetings after an assignment is due. And so, for example, one of the things I started doing a couple of years ago that I've gotten a lot of positive feedback on is to create a video description for an assignment where it's me for anywhere between 10 and 20 minutes talking about all aspects of the assignment, exactly what I'm looking for and how it's going to be graded. And I've gotten a lot of good feedback because I think with students, especially those learning remotely, there's always that lack of clarity of what is this teacher like? What is he really looking for? How is he really going to grade this? And it's something that I do even for my face-to-face classes because it allows them, as unfortunately many of us know, right? Any questions that you described in class, everyone says, no, we're good. And then of course, an hour or two before it's due, you get email after email about it. And I found that having those ample resources up front is really effective. In addition to that, I think also being available for one-on-one meetings afterwards as much as possible is important because then you can learn more about what the student's going through, maybe get context for how it impacted their work on that assignment or the last section of the course, and you can give them more specific detailed feedback, maybe to better maximize their time writing an assignment or to better have work-life balance that is more doable for the course than what they have created in their head. So those factors of really loading up on the front end of assignments with the resources they can access and use anytime. In addition to that, being available one-on-one after an assignment's due when they get their grading feedback back can be really effective in that case as well.
Tim, thoughts?
Yeah, I'm looking at the question. It's the balance between accommodating students and providing structure, discipline, and respect. I think as a university leader, I think that balance can be talked about in terms of a university culture, the culture of the organization that you're a part of. And I think it's important to talk about the conduct of how we're going to treat each other. To me, how you treat each other and the expectations for how we treat each other. Culture, I think, is really that behavior is the manifestation of the culture of an organization. So for me, it's very important that I set the tone for how we're going to treat and behave and interact with each other, and then creating a system where we hold people to those expectations. And when those expectations are not met, we have discussions about that. But I think that is one way to achieve the balance, is to have a real clear set of expectations in terms of the conduct and how we treat each other as teachers and students and staff members, but as community members of a university.
Thank you so much. Jean?
Yeah, first I want to ask Washington if he or she would explain more about what's the issue with respect and accommodating students. Second, I want to distinguish between equity and equality. What I've seen is some faculty in the effort to treat every student equally will actually end up handicapping a student who needs special accommodations. For an example, we know that if a student is in the hospital, they can't take our tests. So equity is giving them some kind of deferred opportunity to make up for the test because they couldn't make it. So that's pretty clear cut. Whereas not so clear cut is if a student is late because the babysitter didn't arrive, or if the student doesn't understand what your instructions are. Do you then give accommodations to that student? That's where it gets really tricky. And the way I always managed it in my head was, what feels equitable to me? And if another student challenged me by saying that I gave this person this special opportunities that I didn't give everyone else, can I defend myself? In the end, though, what I want to emphasize is it does come down to a judgment call in some of these gray areas where it's not clear which way to go.
Yeah, that can be really difficult between wanting to provide equal chances for everyone, but then situations come up. And especially right now during COVID, I get emails all the time from students who are in situations that they would have never imagined. And so I think we definitely have to give grace and be lenient. We had some more comments in the chat. Mary on YouTube says, thanks for sharing, Jordan. Love the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 idea. Justin, also from YouTube, says, really appreciating the topics and diverse perspectives. And Brandon from YouTube says, thanks for the tip about the Smithsonian. So we are headed into our last question of the night. Here you go, Tim Mottet. These are all great insights, everyone. Learning communication skills is so important online, and it can be such a struggle for so many of us. And so as we're moving forward, it begs the question, how long will this pandemic last, and how long will most campuses be teaching remote? Tim, there are higher ed professionals and journalists who have claimed that the events of 2020 could signal an enormous loss in student enrollment, local, state, federal funding, and a radical change in the on-campus experience. Do you share these concerns? And if so, how can institutions prepare for such circumstances?
Yeah, I think it has jolted the university campus and the culture of our campuses. We're really in the middle of what is the perfect storm in terms of enrollments at universities. We've got, in addition to the pandemic, you've got states defunding higher ed for a lot of reasons, and shifting more of the cost burden onto families. You've got a changing demographics in our country, fewer college age going young people. That's going to be happening, and that trend is going to continue for another, I think, another 5 years before we see an upward trend in those demographics. You've got a student population that is less loan, they're loan avoidant. They are concerned about the debt, and so they're less likely to take out loans. And then you have a public that is also critical of higher ed, and do we still see the value of higher education? I want to reiterate the value of higher ed for a young person going to college over a lifetime. It is the research shows it's $1 million over a lifetime for those with a college degree versus those without a college degree. With that said, there has been a decline in enrollment. I think what universities need to do moving forward is it's what we've always known, but it's becoming more important that we make the necessary changes. Number one, it's having the right programs. It's having the programs that students want. It's also having the programs that are going to drive the economic development of your region and trying to map student interest with those needs. For me, I think curriculum has a shelf life, like your ground beef and your milk. It's got a use before date on it. And I think some curriculum has expired. And I think it's important for universities to keep curriculum current and keeping it fresh. In addition to a modern curriculum, I think it's also important to make sure that, and I think the pandemic has forced this, to make sure that we're meeting the needs of students through multiple modalities. I think in the past, we may have been more resistant to online education. I think through the pandemic, we have gone through what I call punctuated evolution. And that has been really an outcome that is very desirable for the future of higher ed. I think we always have got to work to make college more affordable. I know at CSU Pueblo, it used to be that most of our students have to work, and rather than viewing student work as an obstacle or something that we have to work around, we're taking work and integrating students' jobs into the curriculum and into their degree plan and their pathway. It's now an integral part of their plan versus something that we've got to work around. And so we're very mindful of making work for our students, and that helps making college more affordable. And then it's also looking beyond the traditional age, first-time, full-time freshman student. A lot of universities are really around this paradigm of the traditional freshman, and that will always be important to a university. But today, there's communities with a large number of adults with some college with no degree. There is a degree for there's room for graduate education, for upskilling a workforce as artificial intelligence finds its way into the workforce. Advanced credentials and different types of credentials are going to be needed and important moving forward. So I think universities know what they need to do, and I do believe time is pretty critical for us to make those necessary changes.
Those are really great points. Jean, I think you had a follow-up.
Yeah, Tim, I'm fascinated by the idea of integrating work into the curriculum. I know how we do it out in my college as social work. That's fairly easy to do. But how can you do it at the university level?
At the university level, we are taking work study. We have applied for, it's an experimental site with the Department of Education that allows us to move some of our work study dollars off the campus and into the community. So we want to map students who are working. We want them to be involved in work study jobs in industries that map to the work that they want to do, give them college credit for that work, get them paid for that work. And we are incentivizing employers by paying half of that wage. The employer pays half of the wage, and then the wage goes to help pay the unpaid invoice. And so it's a different way of looking at work, but a lot of it is occurring through the work study program and this experimental site that we hope is scalable beyond the work study site.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, we're pretty excited about it. it's a new initiative for us, and we're just launching it, so it's pretty exciting.
I love that. Very forward thinking. Barry, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think Dr. Mottet laid out really well kind of innovative strategies that his university is doing, which is awesome. I really do hope those get replicated. There's a couple things I think you could also do. One that's at the college university level, and one actually more at the K through 12 level. So at the college university level, I think kind of building upon what Dr. Mottet is talking about is that as universities now have to deal with maybe decrease in enrollment, more pressure of what's fair tuition, right? And given all the extenuating circumstances, is to have departmental resources geared towards building job partnerships as part of their degree program, essentially. That is, if there is a way for universities to maybe shift some resources and shift their mindset to thinking, okay, our department needs to be building relationships with local, places of employment that will allow them to not just get college credit, but to get paid and have that be part of their curriculum. I think that could be a huge, important way for higher ed to really show a importance they're giving to employment. And the second one with K through 12 is, there's a huge increase in dual enrollment. And I think that's definitely a important factor in decreasing the amount of credits that students have to take once they get to college. But one that I've talked to a few folks about, and I wonder if may start to gain more steam, is having a, whether it's, mandatory for an enrollment practice, whether it's part of a high school course, that is auditing at least a couple class periods, if not longer, of a college course when you're in high school. And I think that could pay off in a couple ways. Is one, a lot of K through 12 students, especially juniors and seniors, don't really know the degree to which programs exist, the breadth of them. The second thing is, I think there's this perception of what college is and college classes are compared to the reality of it. And the more we can demystify that, the more we can demonstrate the reality of it, it will hopefully lead to quicker acclimation, a greater degree of success early on, which is good for everyone. So that adaptation of K through 12 into true college preparation by auditing a course for a certain time period is important, but then also universities themselves recognizing they have to leverage and should leverage more of their resources at their school towards building partnerships for their students, so that way it becomes more of a pipeline than maybe it is currently in some places.
Wow, this has been such a pleasure tonight, everyone. What a wonderful conversation this has been. Unfortunately, our time is at an end. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in and listening. And thanks again to Jean, Tim, Barry, and Jordan for joining us today. Thanks to Troy behind the scenes, making us sound good, running tech, Jacqueline for helping produce this, and Angelica for being our licensee at TEDx San Antonio. If you want more of these conversations, you got it. You can watch previous episodes of Red Dot Café on our website at tedxsanantonio.com/Red Dot Café, and we will have future episodes in the works. Stay tuned and follow us online at TEDx San Antonio for updates. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.